in the basement, actually in the school area. So we request you to please take the kids there. Thank you. Sister Christine converted to Islam on December 8, 2008. She was an active Catholic serving the Roman Catholic Diocese under Bishop Zubik during her conversion. She has always had a deep interest in theology and interfaith work. She has assisted many converts locally through a program she managed at ICP. She managed at ICP called Help for the Convert from 2011 to 2016. She has taught at Carnegie Mellon's Posture Program, teaching non-Muslims about the beauty of Islam. She's currently the executive director at CARE Pittsburgh and assists as a mentor and admin for the New Muslim Support Line through Facebook that works on an international level to help converts. She's also on the board for Amiras, a Muslim matrimonial app to launch soon. Thank you so much. Please have up your sister.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you so much for having me here tonight. As she stated, you're going to hear 3 conversion stories, and I'm sure each one is completely different. I started, sorry if it's buzzing. Is that better? We'll just do this. Is that okay? Okay. So I was working for the Roman Catholic Diocese of Pittsburgh. At that time, it was under Bishop Worrell, who's now Cardinal Worrell. And I was very deep in the Catholic faith. I was an adult altar server, which means when the priest was up on the altar, I assisted with those. I was taking classes to be a Eucharistic minister, and I used to help my grandmother with the Ladies of Charity, which was visiting the elderly within the community and those who were in situations where they were nursing homes and they didn't have many visitors. I started to study because working at the Diocese of Pittsburgh, I had a lot of options to get my hands on a lot of different books. And my mom used to joke that if I was born a male, I probably would have went into the priesthood. And I told her she was probably right. So I was studying and learning more, and I was taking a couple classes about the Abrahamic faiths. And I saw Islam in there, and I'll be honest with you, it bothered me. I suffered from Islamophobia. I was terrified of Muslims. My dad served in Desert Storm. And I kind of set out to prove that the religion didn't belong in that category. I was very ignorant when it came to it. I was arrogant about it. I just didn't want to learn much about it. To my surprise, as I started learning more, I started to like what I was reading, and I kind of liked what I heard. I didn't really have anybody to talk to. I didn't know any Muslims, and being nervous, I didn't reach out to any of them. I was a part of a group online where we would play games and stuff back when the internet was just starting out. And I was in there with a group of people, and there was a particular boy in there by the name of Nadine. And he was much younger than me, but sometimes we would get into spiritual conversations. And he never told me he was Muslim. I had no idea. He's from Lebanon. I didn't even think to ask him. I just knew that when I had questions about some of the things that I was learning about Christianity, he would have really good answers for me, sometimes even better than my own priest. So I continued to study, and I looked and read about Islam off and on from 2007 into the beginning of 2008. And through all of that, I got to a point where I had to have an assignment where I had to write about the Trinity through a Catholic course I was taking. And it took me hours. I couldn't do it. This thing that I believed wholeheartedly and was teaching other people to believe in, I could not wrap my head around it anymore. Suddenly, something that made so much sense to me was completely strange. So, of course, I ran to my friend Nadine and was like, hey, you gotta help me write this Trinity paper. I really can't do it. And he said, why? And I said, because Jesus being the Son of God just doesn't make sense to me anymore. I've read and I've studied so much, I figured out that most of my book is not authentic. I don't know what I'm doing. God has always been the strongest point in my life. And during this time, I was going through a very difficult divorce. So I leaned even harder onto my faith. And instead of finding comfort, which I typically would find, I was totally lost. And I felt completely disconnected from my Creator for the first time in my life, and I couldn't understand why. So I talked with Nadim, and he said, you know what, give me your questions that you have. I'm actually, I'm Muslim, and I was like, excuse me? Wow, okay. So I started sending him and his father and his mother tons of questions, to the point where his father said, where are you coming up with these questions? Why are they so in-depth? And I explained to him that I was working for the church, and I'd always studied theology, and I thought I had a deep understanding of it, and it wasn't working out for me. So I started to read more and more, and then I found out that the Islamic Center of Pittsburgh was really like 3 minutes from my house, and I was blown away. And I drove past it like 4 times. I was stalking ICP. I would drive up and stare, how many are in there? I can't go in there. What if I go in there, but I want a Quran? What am I gonna do? So I called, and Sister Angel at the time was working at the Islamic Center in Pittsburgh, and she said, after Isha, come inside to the front. There will be a Quran at the top shelf for you to grab. Take it with you and enjoy it, and then call me if you have questions. And I said, you're a convert? And she said, yeah. And I was like, nice, someone I can bump all these questions off of. And so I got the Quran, and I sat it down, and I didn't read it right away. And I started going through YouTube videos, because at this point, I was so into studying, and the internet was my only way of getting information. So I'm clicking through, and I see this cute little boy, and he's reciting. And I'm like, okay, I'm gonna listen to this. This is the first time that I'd ever heard the Quran. So I listened to it, and I played, and it's still on my favorites list to this day. And as I listened, just listening to the rhythmic sound of this beautiful boy's voice, I felt something in my heart to where I felt like my heart was actually broken. It hurt so bad. The aching, I'm not kidding when I say I cried off and on throughout the whole night. And it took me back to, I really need to pay attention to what's going on here. What is this kid saying that is making me cry like I just lost my best friend or the death of somebody close to me? Why does it hurt so much? And so I started to open the Quran and read it. And through that, I found myself agreeing with so much, and it just felt so right. And all those questions and holes that I had with Christianity started to be filled with Islam. And I went and I talked to my priest, and I asked all the questions, and he told me, you're walking a very fine line. You need to believe that's salvation. You shouldn't be asking questions like these. To which I said, well, if they don't have answers, then why am I following? And I continued to push harder and harder. I went to Bishop Zubik and talked to him. At that time, he took over from Bishop World. And he said, I see you struggling, Christine, what's going on here? And I said, I think I'm about to make the biggest decision of my life. And he said, what's that? I said, I'm going to leave the Roman Catholic Church. I think I'm going to become a Muslim. He said, what's holding you back? Just curious. And I told Bishop Zubik that the one thing holding me back was I was afraid of spending eternity in hell for disowning Jesus Christ as my Lord and Savior. And he told me to go home and pull the Catholic Catechesis, which is almost like the jurisprudence for the Roman Catholic Church. He said, I want you to open that and read that and tell me what it says about the Muslims. And then maybe your heart will be at rest. So I went home that night, and I was completely nervous to open the book to where he said, and to my surprise, it said that the Muslims would be one of the first people in heaven. I closed that book. It was the day before Eid. I had a couple questions. I was getting to the end, and most of my questions were around the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. I didn't quite understand. I learned a lot of negativity. Personally, he scared me very much. And I went to ICP and Imam Atif was giving a lecture, and it had snowed and it was impossible to get there, but I got there. There was like 2 people there, and the topic that night happened to be about the beloved, peace be upon him. I left there with so much peace in my heart, and I sat at home, and my friend Nadine reached out to me and said, I haven't heard from you, what are you doing? And I was like, I'm ready to change everything. I'm so close, I'm so close. He said, what's holding you back? I said, I don't know. He said, why don't you listen or send me the message about the kid who was reciting that broke your heart? Maybe I can give you some insight. Maybe I can tell you what surah that's from. You can read that, and maybe that will help. And I'm going to send you a copy of the movie called The Messenger. So it was Eid, December 8th, 2008. I sent him the video of the little boy reciting Quran that still has a very profound effect on me, and he said, wow, that's Surah Yasin. You need to open it up and read that. So I did, and of course I cried even more. And then I watched The Messenger. And at the end of that movie, they had the 40 hadith. And I had to take a step back and say, all these things that I was so scared of is the one thing that is making so much sense to me. And I sat there by myself in my living room at the time, and I have to do this. I have to be a Muslim today, right now, this minute. Can't wait any longer. I reached out to Nadim in Lebanon, which was like the middle of the night for him, and I said, I need to convert. I don't know what to do. I don't know how to convert. No one's ever told me, but I need to do it right now, right now. And he's like, I want you to go and sleep on it. It's late. We can discuss it tomorrow. And I said, no, you don't understand. I know now. I know now. I will not go to sleep, because if I don't wake up tomorrow morning, I would have missed the greatest gift available to me. Sorry. So he woke his parents up before Fajr, and I said my Shahada with him online, and everything changed, and I started to teach myself how to pray. I didn't know, so I was watching YouTube videos on how to pray properly and how to do wudu. I was sniffing soapy water up my nose because it said wash your nose out, and I figured, and I wondered, how do the Muslims do this 5 times a day? It's, that's difficult. And it was quickly approaching Christmas. And in my family, I always would serve the Christmas Mass with the priest. And I didn't know, I was still working for the Diocese of Pittsburgh. I didn't know how to tell anybody anything. And I was still completely nervous. So I was at my mother's house, and she asked me, when are you gonna, Father Neil said you're not gonna serve the Mass this year, why not? I'm busy. You're not busy. You've done this for years. It's your birthday. It's perfect. What's wrong? I was faced and stuck in a moment where I had to turn to my parents. And I told my mother, I'm not Catholic anymore. And she said, what do you mean you're not Catholic anymore? And I said, I'm a Muslim now. She said, there's the door. Get out of my house immediately. And it was not what I had expected. My mother and I were very close. After that, for the first year of being Muslim, I was disowned by my family. They would send the priest down every other weekend to try to get me back. My grandmother, even when I would try to visit her, she would say, I'd go get her a glass of water. She asked me if I had poisoned it. My mother said she wished that I would get hurt when I started wearing the scarf to prove to me that it wasn't anything special. But I kept pushing and kept pushing. And over the course of the year, I then met my husband, and my mom and dad started to change, and they would let me in the house. And we started to have talks. And my stepfather took me into the other room and said, don't tell your mother. Please don't tell your mother. But I served and was willing to die for this country so you could make this decision. And I have watched you from a little girl, and you've always loved God more than anybody that I've ever met. So if this is what makes you closer to God, then I'm going to trust you on that. But don't tell your mother. Don't let her know. So my dad became a silent ally for me, which helped me get back with my mother and my family. And through time and a lot of patience with them and answering their questions, alhamdulillah, they accepted me, accepted my husband, accepted the child that we had. And I just started getting more involved because I saw other converts suffering the same types of things that I was, and some of them were leaving. And so I wanted to do more. So I started to bury myself into helping converts, helping them with their families who may not understand. And then I got out of the advertising world and the putting together the Pittsburgh Catholic newspaper and ended up going to the Post-Gazette where I could freely practice my religion. When I joined the diocese, they make you sign a statement of faith, which says if you do anything against the Roman Catholic Church, you can be terminated. And so there was nothing I could really do for that. But at that point, I was able to start practicing, and I just knew I really wanted to help the Muslims in the community. I felt pulled to do more for that. And so over the years and helping as many as I could, I got the opportunity to be honored to be the executive director of CARE Pittsburgh, where I can really then fight for the rights of Muslims and help dispel some of that fear that I myself even once went through. And alhamdulillah, it happened in 2008. In 2018, during Ramadan, my mother and my grandmother both passed away suddenly within 12 hours of each other. My mother took her shahada 3 days before she passed away. My grandmother died after Juma, the last Friday of Ramadan, and my mother died later that night at 1 o'clock in the morning. And after she took her shahada, the next day she no longer was verbal and was no longer talking to people. So no matter how tough this trial has been, no matter how long of a journey it's been, I'm still extremely grateful for every single moment that I've had. And I'm grateful to Allah for guiding me to the most blessed path that I could ever imagine myself all on, and to be with all of you as my family now, the people that I pray with, the people that I want with me in the next life. So thank you so much, and thank you for hearing me.
Jazakallah khair, Sister Christina, for sharing your beautiful story with us. Next up, we have Sister Jamila Mathurst. She is a native of the Philadelphia suburb area and converted to Islam in 2008. She's a graduate of Stanford University with a bachelor's degree in international business with a specialty in languages German and Arabic. Following her graduation, she taught Arabic classes to Muslims wishing to learn the language to better their understanding of the Quran and the religion as a whole. She currently works in the compliance department at an investment firm as an administrative assistant. Sister Jamila, please do.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody. Thank you for having me. I'm actually a little emotional because a lot of Christine's story, it really hits home for me. So I think the first thing I have to say is that I was very young when I learned about Islam. I was 18 years old. And I went to community college, and just my actual name is Jamila. So I was named after my Lebanese grandmother. And so naturally I had a curiosity about Arabs and the Middle East, and what does that mean? What does that look like? And so one of my first classes that I took, there was all these Arabs in the class with me. So I became friends with them. And that's one of the first things I remember, was becoming friends with people that were from the Middle East, and just hanging out with them and seeing what they talk about, what's important to them, or just understanding a little bit more. And so I became friends with a sister named Dinan, and she was a good friend of mine for a really long time. And one day she invited, I actually went to her house to drop something off, and she was there, and no one else was home. And she said, "Excuse me, I have to pray." And I was like, "Okay." And so she prayed in front of me, and I don't know what it was, but I just had like an outpouring of emotion. And this was after we'd been friends for quite some time. And she had told me about Islam, but it wasn't very, she wasn't pressuring me or anything, but she was just friendly with me. And so after that, when she got finished praying, she hugged me and she said, "Why are you crying?" And I said, "I don't know." I have no idea why I'm crying. But what did you say? Like, what is this? And she was like, well, Muslims pray 5 times a day, and, you should read the Quran. And I remember feeling very, like, inclined to the Salah, right? And I said, well, I'm really interested in this now, but I grew up Christian, and my father was a pretty devout Christian, going to church every Sunday. I always like felt close to God. I prayed a lot. I used to say the Lord's Prayer every night before I went to sleep. But I never really understood what it meant. So then I became closer with Banan, and we hung out a little bit more. And she would just ask me some questions sometimes, just basic. And so one day she said to me, she said, have you ever really thought about the Trinity? Oh, I think it's coming again. So she said, have you ever really thought about the Trinity? Like, does that make sense to you? Like, why would God have a son? Why would God need Jesus to be his son? Maybe he could get it. So I said to her, well, I don't really know. I mean, this is just my idea of God. This is what I was taught my whole life. This is what God is the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. That's what Christians are taught. I never really gave it any thought. So it took me some time, and what I can tell you is I felt very humbled at the hospitality of my friends. And so then I started praying, and I started bargaining with Allah, and I started saying, like, okay, God, like, show me a sign. And it was one holiday, and my mother was making a ham, and she had a separate oven in a separate room in the house, and the ham just like burnt to the core. Like, we couldn't even eat it. The whole thing completely burnt. And I was like, oh, that seems weird. I just prayed about, a sign. Like, is this Islam? Is there anything to Islam, right? So then the year was 2008, and I don't know if anybody remembers, but Barack Obama was running for presidency. And I kept praying to God, right? I was like, okay, God, give me a sign. I think I'm sure about Islam. I did a lot of reading online. I said, I think I'm sure about it, but I'm just going to give this one last church a try, right? And I'm just going to go in there, and I'm going to just see what they have to say. And it actually happened to be a Roman Catholic church right down the street from my house. So I went there, and I sat all the way up in the very back. Nobody talked to me. Nobody said anything. And I'm looking around, and I see all these buttons, like, on the clothes, and it said, McCain Palin. And, like, it was like, and then somebody got up there, and they were basically, like, saying, you need to vote for McCain Palin. And I just felt like, oh, that's weird. And I just was like, oh, that's strange. Like, why would they be promoting that in a church, And then I got out to my car, and there was a pamphlet shoved in my car, like, in the gasket of my window. I pulled it out, I opened it up, and there was a picture of an aborted fetus inside the pamphlet. And I was like, okay, that's my son. I'm done. And I went home, and I kept reading, and I think what really got me was the concept of Allah being the creator, the one, and the only thing that was really hanging me off was the Prophet Muhammad. So I kept asking some questions. And again, this really took at least, I'm talking maybe 6 to 8 months. Like, there was a long span of time that happened here. And so I did a little bit more reading, and then I finally was like, this makes sense. The 5 pillars make sense. The principles of the religion make sense. The 6 articles of faith make sense. And I just continued to want to study Arabic, and I just took my shot. I was at home, and I read it, and I said, this is what I believe. And I was absolutely sure and firm about it. But I will say that I had to seek my support elsewhere, because this wasn't something I could talk about with my family. I mean, this is completely, even my parents now, they wouldn't even want me to be here. Like, this is not an accepted thing at all. So I have to say that. I mean, it's a complete change of one's life. It's just completely, down to obviously the dress. I wasn't in hijab this whole time, So yeah, that's really that's really it in a nutshell. But yeah, it took some time, but I alhamdulillah, I have to say this team really is a beautiful gift from Allah. So I feel very grateful. Thank you for having me here.
Sister Jamila. Last but not least, we have Brother Bill Bartlett. He took his Shahada on the 20th day of Ramadan, 2018 at the Islamic Center in Carnegie. Since then, he has been active in both the At-Tawheed Masjid and ICP communities. He is a father of two sons and presently lives in the Hill District neighborhood. In his career, he spent 15 years directing nonprofit youth and adult civic education and engagement programs. What brought him to Islam, he credits the exemplary character of local leaders who are Muslim, and Al-Hajj Malik Shabazz, also commonly known as Malcolm X, and a close friend of Brother Bill, who had reverted to Islam when they were young adults. The actual decision to wander into AIC he attributes to the unseen mysteries experienced in the month of Ramadan. We'd love to hear it, Brother Bill.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, everyone. How did you guys figure that it's okay? Thank you all for inviting me. I have to admit to being a little nervous. I don't often talk about myself or this journey any more than I need to. But increasingly, I feel it's important to share. So here we go. I appreciate the sister sharing before me because there's a lot of similarities, also some differences. But I too grew up. My religion of origin, my family was Catholic, Roman Catholic, and so I'm a product of 12 years of Catholic education, and I was the altar boy and all of that stuff as well. Fortunately or not, when I was blessed with an inquisitive mind, and I was not ever terribly afraid to ask questions. And so all throughout my development, I would be asking the difficult questions to the priests and all that stuff. And when I was 17, I got to a place where I completely rejected pretty much the entire worldview that I grew up with. I rejected the religion. I rejected the nationalism with which I was rather indoctrinated. I grew up in a rural area, and if you go out there, you see all the American flags. So I basically grew up with the mentality that America is the greatest country that has ever been and will ever be, and only Catholics will be going to heaven. The rest of everyone is going to have who knows what happens to them. But most pernicious or most kind of like crazy was that there's an evolution to humanity, and the white man is the top of that evolutionary chain. And so when I got to a place in my teenage years that I just realized that all the stuff that was handed to me was garbage, and I rejected it all at one time. And I was left with nothing. I didn't have mentors guiding me in this process. And so I was lost. And I call it, no one's corrected me yet, so if I call it was like the beginning of my Jahiliyyah, right? And so it was like, for the next, I'd say decade, probably 9, 10, 11 years, I filled that void that I had with drugs, alcohol, and a whole bunch of things. And when I was, I got to a place where in a particular year, I got a woman pregnant, and shortly thereafter, my father got diagnosed with terminal cancer. And so this became this super powerful year in my life where I was barely functional as an adult, but a whole lot was being called from me at that point. And I really think that marked the beginning of my recovery. I didn't immediately recover from drugs and alcohol at that instant, but I did begin reaching out for help. And I mention all of that because that was the beginning for me of being open to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? It was the beginnings of an opening. And then after my father died, my son was born. Well, actually, they happened 3 months the opposite direction. About another year later, I entered recovery, and I don't know if anyone here is familiar with 12-step programs, but they, they're a spiritual program, and they're not ascribed to any particular religion or denomination, but it really encourages you to be open and willing to believing in a power greater than yourself, a higher power. And so, going through that process, I did become open to that, and for the next, and I became a more functional adult. I became a father. I did those things, and I suppose I can do this. I'm sorry. I became a father, and I gained custody of my son because his mother and I were on very similar paths, but she didn't have the crisis of her father dying and whatnot. We didn't have the same resources available to her and the same friends to reach out to for help. And so I was able to provide a better living situation for my son. So I was raising my son. I became a community organizer of sorts, as was mentioned, I guess, in my bio, teaching youth and adults how to identify problems that they want to solve collectively, and figuring out how we can do that and how we can push the levers of whatever institution you might be part of or government that you're living within, whatever. So that was my kind of work, community organizing, political organizing for a number of years. My faith journey during that time was kind of a dibbing and dabbing. That's not a technical term, but I've chanted with the Hindus, I've meditated with the Buddhists, I've gone to a whole string of various Christian churches, black churches, white churches, and not really ever thinking that I wasn't really ever looking to join any of them. I figured that I would come to a spirituality of my own, and I don't need, I was one of those people that you'll often hear say, I'm spiritual but not religious. That was me. And I certainly never thought that Islam would be where I landed, let me tell you. However, I should mention that throughout my adult life, I was influenced. I'm going to just say I was influenced by Muslims, and notably so. One of the most important, like I said, I really had this gut-turning rejection of the racism that I grew up with, and one of the keys to putting just really calling out the lies of that was when I read the autobiography of Malcolm X. And I don't know if any of you know the story of Malcolm X, but he's somebody who came up through in America here through the Nation of Islam, which is not Islamic but it serves as the gateway to a lot of folks for Islam. But he then eventually became a Muslim himself and went to Hajj and wrote this very beautiful letter from Hajj. I recommend everybody read it if possible. But anyways, that was an early impression on me. I also had a friend who converted when he's a couple years younger than me, but he was 18 when he converted to Islam. And, I never really thought much of it necessarily, but him as a person, was and still is one of my heroes. I mean, he has operated with such consistency and integrity to his particular mission throughout his whole life. It's been very admirable, and I've always looked up to him. And then in my community work here in Pittsburgh, there are a couple community leaders that I would work with often, and their example to me was, nobody ever was like, hey, brother, you should become a Muslim. I don't think anyone ever said that to me. But the character of themselves as Muslims, it was just standoff. It just stood out to me from the other folks that I would experience. So fast forward to 2018, and in 2018, my career was changing. I was looking for different work, and I was really struggling personally because it seemed like I just couldn't quite get life. I really struggled with discipline, self-discipline. I would really struggle waking up at the right time in the morning, or going to bed, or not doing a behavior I didn't want to do, or whatever. It's like I was just not disciplined, self-disciplined. And I was talking to this one woman one day, and she was too young to be this wise, I swear. But she said, well, of course you don't have self-discipline because you're not a disciple. And I was like, what? I thought it was maybe she was like speaking some Christian stuff at me or something. But man, that stuck with me. I just kept thinking about it. And I decided to look up the word disciple in the dictionary. And disciple means student. And so discipline means ascribing to a teacher's way. And I was like, this is all interesting. And I was talking at the time with a pastor who was a friend of mine. We were colleagues. He's a pastor of a church up in Knoxville neighborhood. And I attended his service one day, and I just had I can't explain, it was a religious, a spiritual experience. I knew that this was the time that I had to make serious changes in my life. And I left his church assuming that I was apparently going to be a Christian now. But one of the things that I felt was clear, that I clearly had to do, was to go on a retreat. And so I made a plan, and I packed my bags and got myself a route map, and I took a week and a half bicycle trip. At this time I was in between employment, so I was able to do that. And the destination to my bike trip was this friend that I had mentioned earlier, who had converted when we were 18. None of any of my thinking had anything to do with Islam. But I'm on this bike trip, and I speak to the pastor that I had, whose church I had this spiritual experience in, and he was telling me about his brother's funeral. His brother had just passed, and he went to can't remember, I think it was Detroit or something for his brother's funeral. Now, his brother was a Muslim, had converted to Islam. And this pastor friend of mine was telling me just how blown away he was by how the janazas, I mean, I know now it's called janaza, but he was just so touched by the humility of it, by the whole community coming up to him, one at a time, and just, saying a little piece about his brother. And so that was interesting. I'm on my bike trip, and I realized that the day that I had that experience in the church was the first day of Ramadan of that year, the month of Ramadan. And so I'm on this bike trip, and it's like now probably, 8, 10 days, whatever, into Ramadan. And then I get up to my friend's house, and I'm like, we end up having conversations, and I asked them a couple things about Islam, because there were just all these odd Islamic things going on during this special period of mine. And I should add one other thing too. I was living in Carnegie at the time, and if you've ever been to Carnegie, the Islamic Center is right on the corner of Main Street. So you really can't go anywhere in Carnegie without passing the masjid like every day, and which I did. And so like Sister was saying before, I kept passing this place, going, man, what's going on in there? There'd be sometimes all these people, with robes and all these things. And I was always curious, but I was just too afraid, to just check it out. Well, anyway, so back to my story. At the end of my bike ride, I'm with my friend. I'm asking him some things about Islam, and he said a couple of important things that were important to me. Again, he wasn't trying to convert me or anything, but the things that he told me were, they settled concerns that I had. And then he gave me a piece of what I now know is the Hadith of Jibreel, and he talked about, the practice of Islam leading to, stronger faith, and stronger faith allows you to express your faith through all your creative actions. And that was inspiring to me. So I came back to Pittsburgh, and the next day, I was like, all right, I'm going to do this. And so I walked through the door of Tawheed, and a couple brothers happened to be there, of course, because it was Ramadan. I didn't know that. I know this now, but it's very special timing. They were there, and they said, hello, brother, can we help you? And I said, yeah, could you teach me how to pray? And they said, sure. So they took me in and taught me how to pray, Salat. And by the end of the day, Sheikh Saeed had me up there taking my Shahada. And my mom asked me a couple weeks ago, what made me convert to Islam? And I still can't really answer that question, because it was such a process of these various influences all converging at this one particular moment. And it wasn't something that I had a great deal of thought or consternation about. I didn't ponder it for weeks and read the Quran and figure out if it would apply to me. It was none of that. And I told my mom, I said, I don't know that there was any particular reason that made me choose to convert to Islam. What's more important in my journey, or to me, is that I kept coming back to Islam. And from the day one to day 2 to day 3, I keep finding more beauty and more truth. And one of the things that was that was told to me early on that was such a beautiful thing is that Islam encourages you to ask questions. I grew up where that was not, that asking questions got me into a world of trouble because there was nobody that was willing to go into, those questions with me. So I can just say now that since that time, I've experienced so many blessings. Salat has been a huge part. It took me, in all honesty, probably 2 years, I don't know, to really establish Salat in my life, but having it there, praying 5 times a day at a minimum, observing the fast of Ramadan, now I pretty much know how to do it too, and being able to be part of the community, volunteering in various capacities, it's just been, there have been so many blessings that I've experienced. The more I learn, the more I love it. And I've come to see the way I used to believe as the whole piece of I'm spiritual but not religious, and I started to see how arrogant that was of me, to think that there's all these billions of people that submit themselves to a code, but me, I'm gonna be, I'm gonna do my own thing and somehow make it out all right. I don't know. I thank you all for the examples that you provide of Islam in the daily life, because it's been an inspiration to me, and I don't know what else to share, but I really appreciate the opportunity to share. Thank you.
Okay, Brother Bill, if you will please stay here. I will also request Sister Jamila and Sister Christina to come up here. At this time, we'll open the floor for questions. If anyone has any questions for our guests, you are welcome to ask.
One question here.
Assalamu alaikum. My question is that once you've accepted Shahada, have you experienced any challenges being accepted in the Muslim community? And if so, what can Muslims here do to make the journey for people to accept Islam easier?
So I think the question was, any challenges? Sorry. Okay. Challenges with being accepted into a community? Well, I guess for one, I'm not an immigrant, I've never been outside of the United States. So, but I actually remember feeling very accepted. I didn't really struggle in that way. I didn't have, but if anything, it was like what Brother here said, that it was an outpouring of welcoming. I don't really recall challenges maybe other than language, because I don't speak. I had to learn Arabic, but other than that.
I feel like when I first converted, everybody was all like, "Oh, new convert," like a shiny toy. And I felt accepted because everybody wanted to know a little bit more about my story, and they wanted, but after a year or two into it, especially because my family didn't support me and I felt extremely isolated at that point. And then I ran into situations where I know my beloved sisters always have the best intention, but it would be like, "Oh, sister, haram. Sister, haram, sister, haram, sister, haram, 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 don't do this, don't do this." And I'm like, can I breathe? I was scared to breathe. I'm like, okay,